The canoes we're using for the expedition are the H2O Canoe Company Super Cruiser and Outfitter 186. Both of the boats are 18 feet 6 inches. Both of the boats are extremely stable and very good at hauling a great amount of gear, since we're going to be carrying about 55 days worth of food and camp stove fuel and equipment for the trip. H2O canoes are built in Ontario, just outside of the canoe park known as Algonquin Park, which is very similar to Quetico, perhaps a little smaller, but still has a very strong canoe culture kind of centered around it, just like Ely or the Gunflint Trail or Atikokan in Ontario. The H2O canoes use some really interesting things. They don't borrow, but they used kind of the best components of a lot of the best boat companies out there, best canoe companies out there, and kind of combine them into one. So they use epoxy resin in the construction, and they use vacuum bag technology where they infuse the resin into the laminate so that the cloth to resin ratio is very low, so they can build a very lightweight but very stiff canoe. These canoes are made of Kevlar, which is kind of a more traditional material, but we wanted the impact resistance of the Kevlar that is kind of legendary within the canoe community. There are some newer materials H2O uses, like a Negra and things like that, but we chose to go with the Kevlar layups for these boats for the Beyond the Delta expedition. As you can see, both canoes use a sliding bow front seat. That's because the weight difference between myself and one of our 9-year-old daughters and my wife and our 9-year-old daughters is pretty great. So it will help us trim the canoes a little better for the prevailing conditions we find on the trip. You'll also see that my canoe has a foot brace mounted in the rear, so I can use that to generate a little more power when paddling in windy or rough conditions. Both canoes can carry a lot of gear. We're going to be able to carry more than we need for the trip, but it'll make for kind of a good experience for the kids. 9-year-olds on an expedition. We want to make sure that we have everything we need for the whole trip and make the trip enjoyable for them as well. You can see from the bottom of the canoes that they do have a full sheet bottom of foam, which helps stiffen the hull, but unlike some other companies that I've tested out and used, they also include ribs as well that brings the stiffness up the side of the boat and makes for a very, very stiff hull, and where you don't have oil canning in the hull in certain areas of the hull. I can tell you that I've used other canoe companies that don't use the ribs and they just use the sheet in the bottom of the canoe, and it can get pretty disconcerting when you're paddling into some bigger waves and the whole front of the boat oil cans in 4 to 5 inches and then makes this springing sound as it punches back out from the pressure of the waves. It's very disconcerting, and these boats don't do that. They're extremely stiff and they are extremely strong, especially with the epoxy resin. H2O Canoe uses a deep dish yoke if you want that. They can also do a flat yoke if you prefer that, but the deep dish yoke is standard. You can also see from the gunnels on these boats that the gunnels are a carbon integrated gunnel system, and so in their Pro-Lite epoxy layup, which is what these boats are, you do find an epoxy carbon gunnel. Now, what H2O does differently is that some boats don't have any aluminum at all on the gunnel when they do a carbon gunnel, which can lead to some problems because the carbon is not protected. Now, carbon's great, but it's not the best for impact resistance. And the H2O canoes use a L-channel aluminum, which is then riveted into the outer and topmost edge of the carbon gunnel. So the top and the outside edge of the carbon gunnel is protected by that aluminum L-channel, which adds to a much higher durability for the carbon gunnel in the H2O canoe versus a carbon gunnel in many other manufacturers. So for these reasons and many others, this is why we chose the H2O Canoes. We had a choice of a lot of different canoe companies to bring into the shop that were decent, but when you actually paddle the stuff on the water and you do some pretty big trips, you realize that, you know, these small things can add up and make a pretty big difference to the overall durability and performance of a canoe. And you know, when we're going to be 14 days out from the nearest village, the next nearest village, durability and reliability of the boats is really of utmost importance. You know, and for the weight that these boats come in at, they're often lighter than what's offered by many of the other manufacturers. And so therefore we feel that the H2O canoes are among the best in North America. And so again, that's why we're using H2O. That's why we endorse them. That's why we use them. And that's what we're doing. So please follow us on our YouTube channel, Umingmaq Paddle Touring Center, and on our website, umingmaqpaddleshop.com, where we have a blog, and we will be posting daily our location and a map of where we're camping for the night during the trip, with a small blurb about what happened on that given day of the trip. So please follow us on those two locations, and thanks for watching.